fantastic grouping. I'm really, really pleased to be able to discuss this. So yeah, my name is Glen Jordan. So Dundee, thanks for the kind words, but I'm actually not a real domain expert in this area, but in the sort of blockchain space, but really I got involved with it. I'm neither a housing expert nor a blockchain expert, but I do come from a tech background and a development background. And how really I got engaged with this was I was challenged by a Dutch asset manager to look at how to create pensions for people who went to the formal employment system. And it took me on a very circuitous route to the realization of property as an asset and the ability for affordable housing as an asset, and then started seeing some of the constraints around that, the structural constraints. And it was really while looking at that, particularly started looking at title deeds as a constraint, you know, and land ownership, and really got to the realization that not only was it title deeds, but it was in the entire ecosystem, the structural ecosystem that we're looking to repair around property. We've got very little chance of repairing it with the tools that we have at hand, that the tools that have developed, if you like, in the first world over the last couple of 100 years. So to be able to implement solutions, trying to, with the same tools, we were going to have the same problems. Or insurmountable problems, which is why we're not getting to solving the issues that we're looking at. And it was really while looking at that started addressing, saying, is there a way that we can use technology to overcome the structural issues, particularly around financing and then around ownership, around, are there ways that we can do this? And that was really why Empower was born, because realized that the traditional approach and our way of thinking, and it's really difficult to overcome this way of thinking because it's so innate in us, is top down. It's how we think. We think about things as a top down approach, you know, particularly when it comes to financing, or it comes to property development, or title deed solutions. We always think about government has to solve this. It needs to be government initiated. And we know in our part of the world that government doesn't solve these issues. Government can't solve these issues. And I was working on some title deed projects and, you know, looking at thousands of properties, and it was taking years and years and years for the stories to be sorted out in order for that to happen, which means that funding can't flow. The other aspect about the traditional funding sector is that it's historical. It always looks at history. So we look at, and as we know, it works, the financial system works very well for people who have access to it, and for whom, generally speaking, they don't need it. And by that, I mean, when I say don't need it, it's more from the point of view of it works for the elite, if you like, for the privileged few at the top, generally speaking. And I think South Africa is a great microcosm of that. It's a great representation. And while doing the research into trying to find the solution for this pension fund, or how to build wealth, a fundamental key part is how do we use property to build wealth? The realization and the research showed that in Hout Bay, in Hout Bay, which was a wonderful microcosm, because literally it's 300 meters between the first world sector and the township environment, there was a fourfold difference in the informal. The informal sector was paying 4 times more for their rental per square meter than outside of that. So it's not a function of there's a lack of funding, or a lack of money, but it's actually a lack of structure. It's a lack of capability. It's that market is completely invisible to the formal sector. And that was the challenge, and that's the real opportunity that comes with blockchain technology, and particularly decentralization, because it's about peer-to-peer, person-to-person, as opposed to traditional infrastructures. And it was with that so I started looking at it. We started looking particularly at the backyard market in South Africa. And so that, as most of you probably knows, that in the apartheid structures, there was a little house on a plot of land, and so the owner sits with his house in the middle of the land, but often rents the land out in order for tenants to move on to. But why can't they afford to put in proper infrastructure? Because the rental that people are paying just for that land is higher, generally speaking, than it would be for a formal entity. And it comes down to two things. One is, as I say, title deeds, obviously ownership, proof of ownership being a key issue. The other aspect is that there's insufficient capital in the properties in order to generate that kind of infrastructure. In other words, to put up a block behind the house, if you like, to put a formal put a formal building on that. And then the banks don't take into account rental income as income. So the banks can't see this as a business, but they see it as a mortgage, and therefore it doesn't comply with mortgage rules. And this is the kind of thing that we often come up against in the developing world, is this constant rule-based mechanism that just prevents people having access to the financial systems, having access to this kind of capacity. So the whole thing that we're saying is there a way that we can be both forward-looking, and so instead of taking a backward historical approach in terms of ownership, that the ownership only transfers at the end of the process as opposed to the beginning? And is there a mechanism, therefore, that we can use for funds to flow in and out in a way that's both efficient and presents major opportunity? And I think that's really where the technology comes in. With the decentralization, is that we're able to look at peer-to-peer and at the ability for funds to flow both back and forth very cost effectively without the need for institutions which add significant cost. And it's that mechanism that constantly makes this invisibility, so that the cost of affordable housing, the cost of financing for affordable housing, it makes it so high. So is really there a way to use technology to reduce that cost? And that's really what we're trying to do at Empower, is to build from the bottom up, to empower people on the ground to create solutions, as opposed to centralized large-scale solutions, but to enable from the bottom up to be able to present solutions and to be able to present opportunities in terms of that able to look forward, but still to build wealth and assets. So just in a little bit of history, we started in Mozambique, excuse me, with a developer called Casa Real. And we've started introducing there, so affordable housing. Casa Real is one of the primary drivers in terms of affordable housing, pushing the cost of the entry-level affordable home down. So it's pushed it down from 10,000 to an entry-level 10,000, 50,000 to 10,000. And then what we're doing is providing through decentralization, the ability to fund a lease-to-own opportunity for those affordable homes, so that they're paid off over time, so that the developer can afford to develop, but the new owners, if you like, have access to lease to own, so that they can come into the system without having to have had a track record or be part of the elite. And just to give you a sense of that, we're on our next project, which is the next 30 homes, which will increase the number of mortgages in Mozambique by 5%. And that's just a crazy stat, that if you think there's 600 mortgages in Mozambique, if that gives you a sense of the absolutely non-functionality of the financial system, when people can't afford a $10,000 home and can't get a mortgage for a $10,000 home. So I just wanted to give a brief introduction, but I'm sure there are questions, and if not, then obviously I've got stuff to go through, but I just thought there might be some questions around that, particularly around, lots of people have lots of questions around the technology and what the differences are, and why this kind of decentralization is an opportunity, or could be an opportunity for this market.
Just a quick question, Glenn.
Yep.
So obviously I understand the blockchain aspects and everything else. And as you're doing lease to own in Mozambique, part of the problem with financing in the normal way is usually due to, as you said, credit availability. How are you vetting, I guess, the residents that you're then potentially putting through this process? Is there a vetting system, or is it just, we're going to go a completely unconventional way, therefore, if you are able to pay first month's rent, you can be part of the project or you can have a house?
So great question, thank you. So no, again, the whole thing around decentralization is putting the power, as opposed to us centralizing it, is to put the power for the entities on the ground. So that's the key part around it. So the developer is doing that process. So they're doing the selection process. So the developer, has an understanding of the levels of income that are required in order to be able to pay the lease payment, and therefore looking at that kind of payment, because again, so often we know that there are these informal sources of income. So it's either family income or informal sources of income, which are so difficult to prove through the financial sector. So yes, from the point of view of the risk is reduced because it's lease to own. And as you know, it costs to move. So it's very challenging for people to move. That, generally speaking, they're far more conservative in terms of creating that kind of opportunity for themselves, or that kind of cost for themselves. But the whole thing around it is that the ability for them to be able to pay is assessed by the entity on the ground, the locals, so that they can do that with less risk. So, but again, it's about decentralization, putting that kind of decision-making capability where it should be, which is right at the coalface for the individual entities who stand to lose or gain the most by making those decisions. Just maybe further to that, there's a wonderful example that I always use in terms of about the power of decentralization. And it was in the old days before Google Maps, Nokia spent a lot of money building a platform that measured traffic in a decentralized manner, which was, of course, completely disrupted by Google when it came to that, because it was decentralized and the power and the information was at the individual level. And that's effectively the power of decentralization, is the ability to take the intelligence at the edges and use that for maximum benefit on both sides. So both as the source of capital and as at the implementation level, that we use the intelligence at both sides and then link those two through the tech, which is really the power of decentralization.
One other question. Did you have to constitute a property management entity what do your agreements look like? Are the homeowners completely responsible during the period that they are aspiring to, use this hybrid mortgage product? Do you provide any repair assistance? Can you talk a little bit about the warranties on the house, the extent of them, et cetera?
Sure. So again, we are just the platform. So we're just the technology for that. The warranties are on the ground with the developer. So part of that is yes, it's in their interests to maintain it while they continue to own it. So it's a key part of that process in terms of their value, maintenance, because should anything go wrong in terms of the payment, obviously they have to recover that and continue, get another sale. So the whole thing around that is, so yes, there are warranties, yes, there's support mechanisms, and there's a budget for maintenance built into that process. But again, that's built in at that level, not at our level. We're not trying to manage or process that. That's for the developer stroke property manager to manage and to maintain. So we're not prescriptive on that kind of. Again, it's around best practice. The learnings, as I'm sure, from your perspective, it's the learnings are there from utilization of that and what works best in certain markets, but it's not around being prescriptive.
So one other question, how do you integrate your technology? So tell me how you approach this particular project. What was how did you organize your partners? And and create that funnel of potential customers. Can you describe that?
Sure. So obviously we're still very early days. So, our whole objective, I mean, we only started effectively, we started our project at the beginning. We've been about a year effectively in terms of concept and start. So it's very early days. So the part of the whole blockchain ecosystem is built on building reputation. So that's a key part around the process of any blockchain interaction, is that you build reputation. So this community, that's why we started with a trusted partner like Casa Real, which is one of the known developers, implementers. So as a pilot study, we were able to do that. And then part of the process is to say, how do we support that supplier funnel in terms of creating that so that we can create trusted partners as that expands out, and about building reputation. Another part of it is built on gaming theory. So it's been part of the ecosystem that it's more beneficial to be part and contribute positively than it is to try and game the system. And that's part of what we're working on in terms of that reputation building, both from a financial risk perspective and risk and reward perspective. So to house that funding then based on a reward mechanism that enables the sustainability of that in order to promote good behavior in the traditional sense. So that's, again, a key part of what we're doing. But from a starting point, we've said, through these kinds of networks, we know who are good trusted partners, who are good players in the space, and we're able to start backing them as the building blocks towards, and then to work with that and to build the blocks in terms of reputation and how we expand that and roll it out and extend it to unknowns. The other part is also to support new entrants to the market. So we also understand that, outside of South Africa, there's such a lack of small scale developers who have backing. As you know, if it's hard enough to get a mortgage, it's really hard if you're a developer to get an affordable kind of loan. So it's how do we support that process as well? So I think that's it, in terms of what your model and our model could actually start to fit quite well together down the line as we go, because I think that's a key part around what we're trying to do is support the new entrants into the market, and enabling from a financial perspective to be able for that to flow and then to be able to trace that and build reputation.
Glenn, I had a question for you on the technology side as relates to recording title deeds on the blockchain. I know you said you're in the early days, but where do you stand with that process in Mozambique in terms of getting the Mozambique government to recognize those title deeds? And more generally, what's your strategy within other markets moving forward?
So this, great question. In Mozambique, it's slightly different because there's no ownership at all. The government owns all the land. So it's just leasehold. So the developer has managed that process and is doing the leasehold contracts and agreements. We are not trying to resolve the title deed issue. We've realized that on the ground, again, there's lots of knowledge and capability on the ground in terms of dealing with those issues that we can't begin to address. And I think that's one of the sort of key issues around it. So for the developers, it's actually up to the local developer on the ground. They're addressing these on a daily kind of basis. But I think the interesting part for me around that and what we are wanting to support is to start to see the housing more as an income generating asset as opposed to a fixed asset. So I think in terms of driving the circularity of building and that kind of process, as opposed to fixing the building to the ground, the less we can do that and the more we can drive the process, the less fixed we're going to be on title deeds. And I think that's a kind of interesting process as we go. But we're not trying to solve that process through the blockchain, because I don't think we can. And the reason I don't think we can is because, as sort of saying earlier, part of it when I started, because I thought that the title deed would be the building block to funding. And it was the realization that it's just one of the building blocks that's missing. There's so many other building blocks, and the title deed part of it, even if there is, so often there's so many disputes on title or a history of title or some, there's always complexity around it. And the one thing about the blockchain is once it's there, it's there. So you've got to be confident that what you're putting on there is valid. And so often, particularly in the title, I started off actually trying to work on a probability title to say, is there a probability that this is fairly secure? Because, for example, one of the first projects that we invested in South Africa was a woman who had inherited her property from her mother, who'd inherited it from her mother. So had lived there for 30 years, but obviously they died intestate and there was no record of the title deed. So I thought, well, what's the probability if somebody's lived on that property for 30 years? Could you assume that? Could we go to the bank and reduce the cost of capital through through a probability to say between 0, which is unsecured, and 1, which is titled, is there a number that we can come up with that reduces our cost of capital? But that was a step far too far for the traditional financial institutions. And it was with that started to say, okay, well, is there a way then that we can look at it as an income generating asset as opposed to a building, and then secure the income, not the asset? And so legally secure the income, not the asset, so that the ownership still is retained there, but the income is managed, and effectively there's a lien on that in terms of security. Are there ways that we can do it that way as opposed to looking at it from an asset?
Okay.
Does that answer your question, John? Yeah, it does. I understand what some of the issues you're indicating relating to title and some of the informal processes, especially when you're titling land that's been within areas that are more removed from the urban core. So I definitely understand the difficulties there, but I think that's more of a long-term plan or long-term goal. Yeah, I think so, definitely. We're not going to, in my mind, we're not going to solve that issue in the short term. It's too big of a challenge. There's too much of a challenge. Is there a way that we can solve the other aspect, which a large part of it is that the financial modeling part of it, the banking part of it, if you like? Is there a way that we can try and address at least that, to find a way of getting person-to-person kind of reputation, financial flows, as opposed to institution, which then rely on traditional mechanisms to make that work?
I think we had Femi trying to say something. I'm not sure if I heard him well.
No, not at all. I'm.
Oh, gone back onto mute.
Oh, okay. Okay, no, that's fine.
So I think another key, just to address another key element around Empower, and a really, really key element and around decentralization, that one of the significant challenges that we have, obviously in Africa and the rest of the developing world, is that where there is funding in the developed world, and where there's funding required in the developing world, there's obviously, and particularly with property, is the longer term aspect of currency and currency decline, and interest rates. So we're looking at both the affordability, the cost of capital, if you like, in a developing market versus the cost of capital in a developed market. And that comes about mainly due to obviously there's political risk, but it's also around effectively the mismanagement of the economy. So one of the things that we've been looking at is there a way that you can separate out that kind of direct return? If you've got an opportunity to invest in a shopping center in Berlin or one in Abuja, which one offers less risk and which one is going to be more attractive? So the thing around that is there a mechanism to create a disconnect between direct relationship between the currencies. And I think that's one of the really, really exciting things around decentralized and blockchain technology, that when I first looked at blockchain, which was a number of years ago, and to Bitcoin particularly, I didn't see the use case. But interestingly enough, as the platforms have evolved and as the technology has evolved, it's just become clearer to me that, again, this decentralization, the joy of this currency is that it's twofold, that the currency has an attribute which is actually related to the ecosystem, not just the country in which it's resident, as well as being able to transfer value. So there are two really important elements to that. So the transfer of value, the ability to transfer value back and forth, becomes far easier and far more cost effective. So funds to flow back and forth is far more efficient. And the second part of that is the ability to effectively, the share, if you like, in traditional speak, the share or the value in the ecosystem. So when you look at Bitcoin and we say, okay, why has Bitcoin got a value? What is the value in Bitcoin? And it has a certain value because it has the ability to be able to transfer value, and there is an ecosystem around that. So if we create an affordable housing ecosystem where we have players on the ground and funding together, effectively, although you may be investing into one project in one particular country, by utilizing the currency of the ecosystem, you're actually investing into the whole ecosystem. So your return is related to the ecosystem, and the ability actually starts to come to generate value in the developed market. So it's liquidity, it provides both liquidity and less of an impact in terms of currency risk. And I think that's one of the things that's really most of us are battling to get our heads around, because we are so used to the measurement of value through a currency by a nation state, and that's how we think, and that's how we interact, and that's how we transfer value. But as we get more and more of these ecosystems built on different kinds of currencies, we're going to start to find that these ecosystems in and of themselves have values that are different to the countries in which they operate. And that presents a very interesting opportunity, particularly in this space, from the point of view of funding of property, from longevity, and from the point of view of moving capital from where there is large amounts in the developed world to the developing world, where there's huge demand and capacity to grow, which is not present really in the developed world anymore. The growth is not there.
Thanks, Glenn. There is a question from Femi on the chat.
Yep.
He is asking, who are the critical partners required to make this work in a specific housing market? What are the respective roles?
Great question. So maybe if I can share my screen with you. Give me 1 second. Can you see my screen? You can see my screen there, Tanji? Great.
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
Okay, super. Okay, so just in terms of the, here's effectively the structure that we're busy building. So and this gives you a sense of the players in the ecosystem. So we talk about, in our terminology, we talk about above the line and below the line, and above the line is effectively the source providers of capital. One of the challenging things, as we know, with the providers of capital is the cost of capital into the developing world. So it's that cost which generally negates any projects or enabling particularly affordable projects. So it makes it completely unaffordable. So the whole objective is to create as much of a gap, if you like, to create as much value above the line as we can, without extracting that value from the players below the line. And when I say extracting, obviously it needs to be sustainable on an ongoing basis below the line, but return comes above the line. And that's the objective of this, as well as you can see here, the players in the industry. So who are key? These are the key players in the platform. So you need suppliers on the ground, and they are, by suppliers we mean, contractors, building contractors, and they might be, and partners, they may be the same as the landowner or supplier, and they may be the same as the property manager or not. So all of those, roles might be combined or separate, but really it's around the ability for the funds to flow to the suppliers to build the projects, and then the returns based on the time over time. So the returns through the rental or through rental. So I think the key part around this, again, highlighting this process, is the players on the ground are localized. They're on the ground. They know and understand the local conditions, the business opportunities. It's not around centralized, trying to make a one-size-fits-all solution. It's really around saying the intelligence lies at the edges. How do we reward that intelligence, and how do we enable that to flow at the micro level? Because so often, so many of these projects, and I think this addresses, coming back to your question, Lou, is that so many of these projects are attempting to be large scale on these affordable housing projects. So coming in with $100 million, and that attracts big sharks. The objective here is to say, how can we build from the bottom up? How do we enable the smaller suppliers? How do we enable the funds to flow? How do we create visibility of those funds back and forth, so that we can see and know that the tenants are paying, that the money is flowing? We can do all of that on the blockchain. And that's the exciting part around this technology, is that money doesn't disappear into this black hole and hopefully emerge later or not emerge later, but it becomes completely visible as it flows back and forth in terms of delivery, what's being delivered and what is being repaid. Does that answer your question, Femi?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you. That was very helpful. Thank you.
So just around maybe while I've got these slides open, I think the whole objective, as we said, is to overcome the constraints of housing finance in Africa. So it's around liquidity and attractiveness without exploitation of the funded. And that's, in other words, it needs to be affordable. Otherwise, it's not going to work. So our ability, we've cut the cost of capital in half for the Mozambican project. We've cut the cost of capital in half, while the developer has reduced the cost of access. So in other words, they've reduced the cost of the house through smart building mechanisms, but we've reduced the cost of capital. And together, those have enabled a completely new market. And what that has done is opening up an entire market segment that is below the elite, and that is completely untapped at the moment by the current and existing financial markets. And that's really what we're trying to do, is to find that mechanism that enables us to do that, so that we can open this market in a way that, as I say, utilizes the intelligence at the edges.
Glenn, another question for you on the financing side. On the Mozambique project, were you actually responsible for helping them secure that financing? And if so, what kind of returns were you projecting in order to appease those investors?
Yeah, so exactly, we did secure it. And we secure it through decentralized mechanisms. So we did it through we're busy doing it through the sale of NFTs. So utilizing, again, the power of the decentralization. So there's so many people who want their funds to do good while making a return, and to know that that works, and to know how that works. And that's effectively what we're supporting. So there's so many institutions that, you know, the NGOs and goodwill people and banks and impact investors. So people are, that's a huge drive, as we know, whether it's Generation Z, whether it's COVID, whatever's created that, there's a massive demand for that. People want their money to do good and make a return. And so that's effectively what we're utilizing, is the power of decentralization, so that people can directly contribute, to make a return, and invest into projects that they know and can see and are then visible. So in terms of answering your question, we're doing it through the sale of NFTs. We've secured that decentralized funding. The whole objective, though, again, is to decentralize that. So we do not want to be responsible for making it. Our objective is to create the platform by which funders can fund, and those seeking funding can seek it through the platform. And the question is, it's just like linking it. So that's more an Airbnb model, where you've got a you know, it's a platform. That's what the platform is. So right now, that's what we're demonstrating, that there are campaigns that you can do that in order to fundraise and meet those market needs of that demand for that kind of capital that I spoke about. So people are looking for returns. They're looking to do well, but they're looking to do good. And it's those two that we're seeking to put together. So without being exploitative, and it's really maintaining that balance of trying to do that balance. So that's what we did in the return. So effectively, we're coming in at under 10% in Mozambique, which is a significant improvement on the cost of capital in Mozambique.
So Glenn, have you contemplated other markets for executing the strategy?
Absolutely. You know, as I said, we're a startup. So we've said we'll focus initially just with trusted partners as a starting point. And then it's a question of building the platform, building the, you know, proving the concepts, proving the mechanisms, building the values, and then expanding and being able to roll that out to wherever it's required. Correct.
Can you speak a little to the results? You know, how many people have actually gotten lease to own arrangements? You know, where are you in the process? So
very early days, as I said. So we've just done the first, effectively 34 homes in Mozambique. So that's where we are. So it's just been through that process. So we're very early days in the process.
And what's the duration of the financial arrangement with the homeowner?
10 years.
10 years. And is there any requirement? Is there any, you know, earnest money requirement? You know, are they, or they just go right into a static payment?
They go into, there is a deposit, obviously, that's paid. They pay a deposit, and then into the payments, staggered payments.
Okay, and how long does it take for you to actually identify a potential recipient?
We don't, as Empower. The partner on the ground does that. But again, there's such a pent-up demand. You know, again, it was a balance because of getting the Casa Real on the ground to trust that the funding was available. This, you know, because there's such mistrust between there's such mistrust at the moment between the crypto world and the real world. So, you know, crypto world goes, you know, oh, what do we know about building on the ground? And the real world goes, you know, crypto is a bunch of money grabbing, money launderers and drug dealers. So it's really around building the trust to say, actually, this is a tool by which we can utilize it. It's not around a get rich quick scheme. So it was really around that. So it was about building the trust with the developer for them to say this is a real opportunity, so that they could actually start saying to the market, because they didn't want to go to the market because they knew that there would be a demand, but they didn't want to go if they couldn't deliver and break the trust with their customers. So it was all about building the trust in order for that to happen. And that process is what we're going through right now, is building that trust, you know, between all the players, so that, that we can deliver what we've promised.
Very, very interesting. We're working in India currently. We were just awarded a contract, a licensing agreement with one of the estates, and iBuild's being used to manage the construction of 1.5 million homes over the next 3 years. And they're looking for an alternative model. This particular program is one that's funded by both the federal and local government, where the local government is contributing the land. And these are for people that have never owned a home before.
Right.
The homeowner is providing gap funding, and the gap funding really revolves around a very small amount of money to build parts of the foundation. And that's really their skin in the game, their contribution.
Right.
But you can imagine it's very difficult for these people to raise this money. You're talking about people in the informal sector.
Yep.
And talk about pent up demand. I mean, you know, there's an 80 million unit shortage in India.
Yeah.
So this model as a gap finance mechanism
Yep.
for a program like
Yep.
PMAY would be unbelievable.
Yeah.
So I won't take too
Absolutely.
much of your time, but maybe we can have a conversation after this about that.
Let's do that, Lou, because I think it's you know, it's part of it from the exactly. I mean, that's what the visibility of the blockchain, that's the key part around it. You know, it's the
Yes.
auditability and visibility. That's what we're trying to do, is to make sure that we can money doesn't disappear down the line. And that's really what you're trying to do, is to put the power at the edges and to be able to create auditability between the two. And if we do
Yes.
that, we reduce the costs, we reduce the risks, we're reducing, you know, so much of what currently happens. And if there are ways to do that, as you say, linked to the kind of visibility that your structures and can do, as you can say, be very exciting.
Yes. Okay, terrific. Thanks, Glenn.
Fantastic. We connect.
Thank you so much, Glenn. I see we also have a question from Pascaline. What type of houses have you built in Mozambique in terms of size and price? I know we are 2 minutes late, but maybe you can just quickly answer that one, and then we can wrap up the session.
Sure. Quick answer. They were $10,000 homes. They were built on, we actually pushed the boundaries also from a environmental perspective. So we actually pushed it from the standard way. We pushed also to EDGE. So we're using EDGE certified, EDGE advanced, and then also we built 2 CO2 negative. The objective of that was to test, really pushing the boundaries. We weren't terribly confident, but we knew that there might be some market resistance to the CO2 negative being wood. But very much, so that's the basis really. So the whole thing around it was to take from the traditional build and push it environmentally as well, because obviously we know if we're going to address 50 million homes and we're going to address that, you know, throughout Africa, the environmental impact of that will be drastic. So we also obviously trying to promote the whole movement towards environmental sustainability while acknowledging market requirements on the ground. We know that that's key. Otherwise, none of it's sustainable or works.